The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest until you feel your own heartbeat louder than the world outside. Mara sat by the window of her small apartment, the city lights below flickering like restless stars. On her wrist, the faint glow of the countdown ticked down, each second slipping away like grains of sand through trembling fingers. She stared at it until her eyes blurred, whispering to herself words she was too afraid to say out loud. What if I run out of time before I find the courage? The numbers never paused, they never listened to fear, and Mara felt the weight of every passing moment reminding her of everything she hadn't yet spoken. She brushed her fingers over the device, as though touching it could slow the inevitable. In 12 days, something had to change. It wasn't the kind of countdown meant for life and death, at least not literally, but for Mara it felt the same. She had set it for herself, a line in the sand, the moment she promised she would finally tell Ava the truth. 12 days left before silence would become regret carved into her heart forever. The glow from her wrist reflected in the window, faintly illuminating the loneliness in her eyes. She leaned her head against the cold glass, closing them for just a moment, and Ava's face came to her like a memory she couldn't shake. She remembered the first time she saw her. It had been at a small art gallery tucked away on a forgotten street, a place Mara had wandered into on a rainy evening because she had nowhere else to go. The air smelled of paint and varnish, and the walls were alive with colors that seemed to hum. And then there she was, Ava, standing by a canvas, talking about the way red could hold grief and joy in the same brushstroke. Her voice was soft but certain, a melody in the quiet. Mara had watched her from the corner, too nervous to approach, but unable to look away. She felt something spark inside her that night, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Since then, Ava had become a presence she couldn't ignore. They had grown close, closer than Mara had thought possible. They shared laughter over coffee, whispered about dreams that felt too fragile to say aloud, and sat in silence that felt safe instead of suffocating. But underneath it all, Mara carried a secret, a quiet ache that grew every time Ava smiled at her without knowing what that smile meant. She wanted to tell her, needed to tell her, but fear always tied her tongue. Fear of losing what they already had, fear of being seen too much, fear of hearing that dreaded word, no. Mara pulled her knees to her chest, staring at the numbers burning against her skin. She thought about all the times she had chosen silence before. The girl she liked in high school, who kissed someone else while Mara stood in the shadows, pretending it didn't matter. The woman in college who laughed when Mara stammered her feelings, leaving a bruise that lasted longer than any visible wound. Each memory stitched another layer of armor around her, and yet with Ava, that armor cracked. She wanted so badly to let it fall. She wanted to be brave, but courage never came easy to her. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of the spiral. She reached for it hesitantly, her heart jumping when she saw the name on the screen. Ava, the message was simple, casual even, *K, I'm having a few friends over at the studio tomorrow night. Come by? I'd love to see you. Mara's breath caught, and for a moment she thought she might actually cry. She read the message 3 times, her pulse racing like it was some grand declaration. It wasn't, not really, but it meant time with Ava, and that was enough to make her chest ache with both joy and terror. She looked back at the countdown. 12 days left. 12 days to find her voice. She imagined standing in Ava's studio, the smell of paint and wood shavings, the hum of soft music in the background. She imagined walking up to her, confessing everything, and she imagined the way Ava's eyes might soften, or shatter. The weight of both possibilities pressed against her ribs until she could hardly breathe. But when she closed her eyes again, she saw Ava leaning close, her lips curving in that half-smile that always unraveled Mara. And in that vision, Ava whispered something so faint, so urgent, that Mara's soul shook. "It's now or never." Her hands trembled as she typed out her reply. I'll be there. She hit send before she could erase it, then pressed her wrist against her chest as if holding the countdown closer might give her strength. The city outside buzzed on, indifferent, while inside Mara's world tilted, caught between the fear of loss and the desperate hope of love. For the first time in years, she chose to let hope win, if only for tonight. The morning light slid through thin curtains, painting pale lines across Mara's face as she woke with her phone still clutched in her hand. The message from Ava glowed faintly on the screen, a single thread pulling her forward into something she was both terrified of and desperate for. She rubbed her eyes, then looked down at her wrist. The countdown had slipped from 12 to 11 hours ago, ticking quietly as though it carried no weight at all. But Mara knew every second mattered. She whispered to herself as she lay there, promising again that this time she wouldn't hide, this time she would not let fear chain her silence. She forced herself out of bed, standing in front of the mirror with her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She picked up different clothes, holding them against her body, wondering which one might make Ava see her differently. Everything felt like a test. Would Ava notice her in this dress? Would she see more than a friend if Mara wore her hair this way? Would she catch her staring if their eyes met too long? The thought of it made her stomach twist. She leaned on the dresser, pressing her palms against the cool wood, breathing slowly. Fear was already creeping in, whispering reminders of the past. She remembered being 16, sitting in the back of a classroom with her heart hammering as she slipped a folded note onto the desk of a girl she thought was everything. The note had been simple, a shy confession scribbled in crooked lines, but by the end of the day that girl had shown it to her friends. Mara remembered their laughter, the way they looked at her like she was a joke. She carried that shame for years, burying her voice deeper and deeper until silence became a habit she couldn't break. Even in college, when she finally dared to trust again, her honesty had been met with a cruel smile and a casual, "You don't really think I'd ever love you, do you?" The sting of those words still echoed when she least expected, like now, when she needed courage most, but Ava wasn't them. Mara repeated it to herself, over and over, as she paced the small room. Ava was warmth. Ava was kindness. Ava looked at her in ways that made Mara feel visible, not ridiculed. Yet doubt never left completely. She knew how easily she could be wrong, how easily her heart could turn this connection into something more than what Ava intended. And so she practiced. She stood in front of the mirror, speaking words she wanted to say but had never had the courage to. "I care about you more than a friend. I think about you when you're not here. Her voice cracked, and she covered her face, ashamed at how even in solitude she couldn't say it with strength. By the time evening came, Mara's nerves were raw. She arrived at Ava's studio with her hands stuffed into her coat pockets, nails pressing into her palms. The door opened before she could knock twice, and Ava appeared with that familiar smile, her eyes lighting up in a way that made Mara's throat tighten. "You came," Ava said, pulling her inside with a gentle hand on her arm. Mara's heart tripped over itself, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. The studio was alive with sound, voices overlapping, laughter rising, music humming low in the background. The smell of oil paint and varnish wrapped around her like a memory. People moved around the room, holding glasses of wine, leaning toward canvases, talking about brushstrokes and colors Mara barely registered. Her eyes kept drifting back to Ava, who floated from person to person, carrying warmth with her like sunlight. When Ava returned to her side, close enough that their shoulders brushed, Mara swore her pulse could be heard above the chatter. "I want to show you something," Ava said quietly, her voice meant only for her. Mara followed, weaving through the small crowd until they stood in front of a canvas draped with a cloth. Ava pulled it away with a soft flourish, revealing a painting that made Mara's chest ache. It was two figures, close but not touching, their hands suspended in that fragile space where longing lived. The colors bled into each other, soft lines suggesting connection and distance all at once. Mara's lips parted but no sound came. She could only stare. "This one's different," Ava murmured, her gaze fixed on the painting as if speaking directly to it. "It's not about technique or form. It's about what it feels like when you're afraid to reach, but you can't stop wanting to." She paused, then looked at Mara, her eyes holding something Mara couldn't yet name. "I painted it for someone very special." The words struck like lightning, sudden and impossible to ignore. Mara felt every wall she had built tremble under the weight of them. For a moment, she thought she saw her own reflection in Ava's eyes, as though Ava had been painting her all along. The air around them grew heavy, not with the noise of the crowd but with everything unsaid. Mara wanted to ask, needed to know who Ava meant, but fear held her tongue still. She nodded, forcing a small smile, hiding the storm that raged inside her. The countdown on her wrist pulsed gently against her skin. 11 days left. 11 days to step out of the silence that had defined her life. 11 days to finally take Ava's hand before the distance between them became permanent. That night, when Mara returned to her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the dark, staring at the glow on her wrist, replaying Ava's words over and over. For someone very special, her heart wanted to believe. Her fear wanted to deny. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the way Ava had looked at her as she said it, like she already knew the secret Mara carried. The city outside kept moving, but Mara sat frozen in the quiet, holding on to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was the one Ava had painted. Mara couldn't sleep that night. She lay on her back with her arms stretched over her face, staring at the faint numbers glowing on her wrist. 10 days, 20 hours, and some minutes. Each second that ticked away felt louder than the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, louder than the restless cars outside, louder than her own shallow breaths. She kept seeing the painting in her mind, those two figures whose hands hovered just shy of touching. The ache in her chest wouldn't settle, because it wasn't just art to her anymore, it was a mirror of everything she felt but never dared to voice. She wondered if Ava knew. She wondered if Ava had painted it for her. Every fiber of her wanted to believe that possibility, but fear always came whispering back. What if she was just another friend Ava cared about, nothing more, nothing less? What if she had imagined the way Ava looked at her, had mistaken kindness for intimacy, had built entire dreams out of a fleeting moment? By dawn, she dragged herself into the kitchen, making tea she didn't really drink. She tried to write in her journal, but the pen felt heavy, the words unwilling. She scrawled half a confession, then crossed it out so many times the page tore. Her hand trembled as she touched the countdown again, the numbers relentless. She whispered to herself, asterisk, you cannot run again. Not this time, asterisk, but even her own voice didn't sound convincing. The silence in the apartment was filled with echoes of her past, pulling her backward into the places she had spent years trying to escape. The image that returned most often was of her as a teenager, sitting at the edge of her bed with her hands trembling and her mother's voice cutting sharp through the air. People won't accept you if you're like this, Mara. You have to be careful who you tell. You'll ruin everything if you're not careful. It wasn't cruelty, her mother thought she was protecting her, but to Mara it was a prison sentence. She learned early that her love was something to hide, something shameful, something dangerous if spoken aloud. That fear grew roots inside her, and even now, years later, it still pulled her back into that same darkness. But Ava's face rose through those memories, her eyes bright with compassion, her voice carrying gentleness. Ava wasn't like the voices of the past. She didn't judge. She didn't demand silence. And still, Mara hesitated. Her phone buzzed across the table, and she reached for it like it was both salvation and threat. It was a voice message from Ava. Mara pressed play, her breath catching at the sound. Ava's voice was soft, almost uncertain. I kept thinking about last night, about that painting. I think I want to talk more about it with you. Can we meet tomorrow? Maybe at the cafe near the park? I want to tell you something. The message ended, and Mara sat frozen, her chest heavy with a mix of terror and joy. She replayed it 3 times, each word wrapping around her until her hands shook. Ava wanted to talk. Ava wanted to tell her something. That night, Mara lay awake again, but this time it wasn't dread keeping her restless. It was hope, wild and dangerous. She pictured herself sitting across from Ava in that little cafe with the green chairs and the smell of roasted beans, her hands wrapped around a warm mug while Ava's eyes searched hers. She pictured herself speaking clearly, finally saying the words she had buried for too long. But then the fear joined in, whispering different pictures, Ava looking confused, Ava smiling kindly but saying she didn't feel the same, Ava pulling away. The 2 possibilities collided until Mara thought she might split in half. When the next day arrived, Mara dressed with trembling hands, every detail feeling monumental. She chose a soft sweater Ava once said brought out the color in her eyes, and when she looked in the mirror, she whispered, "Please let her see me." The cafe was half full when she arrived, the warm smell of coffee beans and cinnamon in the air. Ava was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked up as Mara walked in, and her whole face lit up in a way that made Mara's heart stumble. They sat across from each other, their hands brushing briefly as they exchanged cups, that fleeting touch sparking something Mara tried to hide. The conversation started easily, with talk about work, about the exhibition, about little things that didn't matter. But beneath it, tension hummed, unspoken words sitting heavy in the air. Ava was the one who finally broke the silence. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "You saw how I looked at that painting yesterday, didn't you?" Her voice was careful, almost testing. Mara's throat went dry. She nodded faintly, unable to force words past the lump rising in her chest. Ava smiled gently, not mockingly, not cruelly, but with a tenderness that made Mara's eyes sting. Maybe I painted it for someone who sees me, she said softly, her gaze locking onto Mara's. The words hit her like a tidal wave. For a heartbeat, Mara thought she had misheard. But Ava's eyes told her she hadn't. She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the warm mug to stop their trembling. Ava tilted her head, waiting, as though hoping Mara might answer, might step into the space between them. But Mara couldn't. Not yet. Fear still coiled tight in her chest, louder than the hope. So instead, they spoke about art. Ava asked if Mara had ever painted, ever created something of her own. Mara admitted she had, but only in secret, sketches and half-finished portraits no one ever saw. Ava's eyes brightened, and she leaned closer. You should show me sometime. I think there's more in you than you let yourself believe. Those words wrapped around Mara like a blanket, both comforting and challenging. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. When they finally parted, Ava hugged her lightly, her cheek brushing against Mara's. The contact was brief, but Mara felt it burn deep inside. She walked home with trembling legs, her mind alive with everything Ava had said. The countdown pulsed on her wrist, 9 days left. Mara pressed her fingers against it, whispering to herself, "This is it. No more running. No more silence. I will tell her. I will not waste another chance." But even as she said it, her voice wavered with the fear that always lived just beneath her hope. The days that followed stretched Mara in two directions at once. On one side, hope began to grow roots, fed by the memory of Ava's words in the cafe, words that hinted at something more, something waiting to be claimed if only Mara could step forward. On the other side, fear coiled tightly in her stomach, whispering that she had misunderstood, that she was weaving entire futures out of fragile strands of possibility. She walked through her apartment with restless energy, starting a sketch and abandoning it, cleaning dishes that were already clean, pausing at the window to stare at the city lights until her eyes blurred. Every distraction was just a mask over the gnawing truth: she was running out of time. The countdown ticked mercilessly, now down to 7 days. The numbers glowed against her skin every time she lifted her hand, reminding her of the promise she had made to herself. 7 days to speak. 7 days to risk everything. She sat at her small desk late one evening, a blank sheet of paper staring back at her. She picked up a pencil and without thinking began to sketch. The lines came hesitantly at first, as though her fear could control even the graphite, but soon the strokes grew more certain. A curve, a shadow, the tilt of a smile. When she finally leaned back, she realized she had been drawing Ava. Not the polished version Ava presented at exhibitions or when surrounded by friends, but the softer Ava Mara had seen in quiet moments, the crease between her brows when she was focused, the way her lips curved when she was lost in thought, the warmth in her eyes when she looked directly at Mara. It was raw, unfinished, imperfect, and it made her heart twist. She touched the page gently, almost afraid of what she had revealed. In that sketch, her secret was undeniable. The next day, Ava called her, excitement buzzing in her voice. "I've been chosen to host a joint exhibition next week. They want me to display some new pieces alongside other local artists. Would you help me prepare? I could use an extra pair of hands." Mara's chest tightened. The exhibition was set for the exact day her countdown would reach 0. It felt like fate was pressing her forward, refusing to let her retreat. She agreed before she could let fear intervene, her voice steadier than she felt. When she hung up, she pressed her wrist against her lips. 6 days left. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. They spent the following evenings together in the studio, the two of them surrounded by the smell of turpentine and the clutter of brushes and canvases. The nights blurred into one another, hours slipping away as they worked side by side. Sometimes they laughed, teasing each other about spilled paint or the way Ava would hum unconsciously while mixing colors. Sometimes they fell into quiet, the silence between them thick but not uncomfortable, charged with something unspoken. Mara found herself watching Ava when she thought she wouldn't notice, the way she leaned over a canvas, her hair falling across her face, her hands moving with confidence and grace. And every time Ava caught her gaze and smiled, Mara felt herself unravel a little more. One night, as they packed up, Ava leaned against the wall and sighed softly. "You know, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever really be seen for who I am. People look at my paintings and think they understand me, but they only see what I choose to show them." Her voice cracked with a vulnerability that Mara hadn't heard before. Mara wanted to step closer, to take her hand and tell her she wasn't invisible, not to her. But the words caught in her throat, heavy with fear. Instead, she whispered, "I see you," hoping it was enough, though she knew it wasn't everything she wanted to say. Ava's eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, Mara thought she saw recognition there, as though Ava understood the layers beneath those 3 words. But then came the stumble. On the 3rd night, as Mara carried a stack of frames into the studio, she overheard 2 of Ava's acquaintances whispering near the entrance. Their words sliced through her like glass. "She's always with Ava lately. Funny, isn't it? They act like they're joined at the hip. Still, everyone knows Ava doesn't date women. She just likes the attention." Laughter followed, low and sharp. Mara froze, her arms tightening around the frames until her fingers ached. Their voices faded as they moved on, but the damage was done. The fragile hope Mara had been nurturing cracked under the weight of doubt. She wondered if Ava had heard similar whispers before, wondered if Ava had ever thought of her in that way at all. Shame flared hot in her chest, shame for believing she could be enough, shame for daring to hope. That night she withdrew, her laughter dimmer, her words fewer. Ava noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked, tilting her head with concern. Mara forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Just tired," she lied, though her chest burned with unspoken hurt. Ava reached out, her hand brushing Mara's arm, but Mara stepped back, too afraid of what might spill out if she stayed close. The countdown glowed against her wrist, 4 days. Time was running out, but the fear of losing everything was louder than ever. When she returned home, Mara sat in the dark again, her sketch of Ava spread across the table. She traced the lines with trembling fingers, her heart aching with both longing and dread. She wanted so desperately to believe the connection was real, that Ava saw her the way she saw Ava. But the words she overheard replayed mercilessly, feeding every insecurity she carried. She pressed her hand over her wrist, feeling the steady beat of the countdown. 4 days left. 4 days to decide whether she would let fear write her story again or finally, for once, choose to speak. She closed her eyes, and despite everything, Ava's voice echoed inside her mind, soft and urgent. "It's now or never." Mara spent the next day avoiding her phone. Ava had sent 2 messages, short ones filled with her usual warmth. "Are you okay?" Asterisk and later, asterisk, want to come by the studio tonight? Asterisk, but Mara couldn't bring herself to reply. She stared at the screen until her chest tightened, then set it face down on the table, as if ignoring it would quiet the storm inside her. She couldn't stop hearing the voices she'd overheard. The sharp laughter that suggested Ava's closeness was nothing more than casual kindness, nothing more than attention without meaning. It twisted everything in Mara's mind, turning every memory of Ava's smile into something fragile and uncertain. What if she had misread all of it? What if every look, every gentle touch had been nothing but the natural warmth Ava carried for everyone, and Mara had been foolish enough to believe she was different? She spent hours wandering her apartment like a ghost, unable to settle. She picked up her sketchbook, but every line she drew blurred with frustration. She pressed the pencil so hard it snapped in her hand, the broken tip leaving a smear across Ava's face on the page she had been trying to finish. Tears stung her eyes as she closed the book too quickly, shoving it under a pile of papers as though hiding it would make her feelings disappear. She sat on the floor with her knees pulled tight against her chest, staring at the countdown pulsing on her wrist. 3 days now. The glow felt merciless, a reminder that she had set this clock herself, that she was the one who had demanded an end to her silence. Yet here she was, paralyzed by fear, retreating again into the shadows she thought she had outgrown. Sleep didn't come that night. Instead, memories flooded her, uninvited and sharp. She remembered standing on the edge of a train platform in college, watching the girl she loved board a train with someone else. Mara had never confessed, never risked rejection, and so she stood frozen, silent, watching the possibility slip away like smoke. The regret had gnawed at her for years, eating at her in quiet moments when she wondered what might have been. She promised herself she wouldn't let it happen again, that she would never again choose silence over truth. Yet now, with Ava, she felt the same old weight pressing her down. The thought of losing Ava's friendship if she spoke was unbearable, but so was the thought of losing the chance to ever know if Ava felt the same. The following evening, Mara didn't answer when Ava called. Instead, she let the ringing fade into the empty apartment, guilt pressing heavy on her chest. She wrapped herself in a blanket on the couch, staring at the dim ceiling, and whispered to no one, "I can't do it. I can't lose her." But even as the words left her lips, another voice inside her rose, louder, sharper. Asterisk, you've already lost before by saying nothing. Do you want to live with that again? Asterisk, the truth of it stung. She pressed her palms against her eyes until the darkness turned into bursts of color, trying to drown out the battle in her head. She didn't expect the knock on her door the next morning. It startled her, sharp and sudden in the stillness. She froze, heart pounding, until she heard Ava's voice through the door. "Mara? Are you in there?" Her tone was soft, concerned, not demanding. Mara hesitated, torn between the urge to hide and the need to see her. Slowly, with trembling hands, she unlocked the door. Ava stood there holding 2 cups of coffee, her smile gentle but her eyes searching. "I was worried," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Mara's throat tightened as she closed the door behind her, unsure if she could hold herself together. They sat at the table, the steam from the coffee curling between them. Ava studied her for a long moment, her expression full of patience. "You've been distant," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Did I do something?" Mara shook her head too quickly, her hands gripping the cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. The words she wanted to say pressed against her lips, desperate to be free, but fear tangled them into knots. Ava reached out, her hand brushing against Mara's, and that simple touch broke something loose inside her. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head again. "I'm scared," she whispered, barely audible. Ava didn't pull back. Instead, she shifted closer, her hand covering Mara's fully now. "Of what?" she asked gently, and the sincerity in her voice unraveled Mara completely. She trembled as she tried to speak, the words halting, uneven. "Of losing you. Of saying too much. Of ruining what we already have. I don't know how to stop being afraid." Her chest ached with every confession, as though years of silence were finally breaking open. Ava's eyes softened, her thumb brushing lightly over Mara's hand. You don't have to hide from me, she whispered. Mara searched her face for any sign of mockery, any hint that she was being foolish, but there was only warmth there. Ava's gaze held its own fragility, its own shadows. After a long pause, Ava spoke, her voice barely louder than a breath. I'm scared too. Scared of being seen, scared of being loved and then left behind. But I don't want fear to decide everything for me anymore. The honesty in her words hit Mara like a tide, washing away some of the doubt that had weighed her down. For the first time, she realized Ava carried her own burdens, her own wounds. They weren't so different after all. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, silence stretching between them but no longer suffocating. It felt like an unspoken agreement, a fragile promise. Before Ava left, she squeezed Mara's hand one last time and said, let's not hide anymore. Tomorrow, let's talk about what's really between us. No more running, okay? Mara nodded, her heart trembling but lighter than it had been in days. When the door closed behind Ava, Mara leaned against it, her breath unsteady. She looked down at her wrist. 2 days left. The countdown glowed like fire now, not just a reminder of fear but a symbol of the choice before her. She touched it with her fingertips, whispering to herself, this time I'll be brave. And for the first time, she almost believed it.
The morning of the final full day arrived heavy with anticipation, and Mara woke with the weight of it pressing on her chest. Her body felt restless, as though her bones themselves understood the gravity of what was coming. She sat up slowly, blinking at the pale light filtering through the curtains, and the first thing her eyes found was the glow on her wrist. Less than 24 hours now. The countdown stared back at her with unrelenting certainty. Her breath hitched, and she pressed her palm over it, as though she could slow the ticking with the heat of her skin. It terrified her, yet it also gave her strength. This was what she had promised herself, an end to the silence, an end to the running. She had been haunted for too long by the memory of every missed chance, every love she had let slip away. She would not let history repeat itself with Ava. She spent most of the morning pacing her apartment, her thoughts loud and tangled. Every scenario played out in her mind, Ava smiling and leaning closer, Ava recoiling with gentle pity, Ava walking away forever. Each possibility made her stomach twist, but what frightened her most was the thought of saying nothing at all. She finally sat at her desk, pulled her journal toward her, and began to write. At first, her words stumbled, messy and hesitant, but soon they spilled out in a rush. She wrote about the first time she saw Ava, how the sound of her voice had felt like sunlight after years of cold. She wrote about the small moments, the way Ava's laugh curled around her like music, the way her hands moved when she painted, the way her eyes lingered sometimes with an intensity Mara couldn't forget. She wrote about her fear too, how it had silenced her for so long, how it had nearly convinced her she didn't deserve love. By the time she finished, her hand ached, and the pages were stained with smudges from her tears. She closed the book carefully, as though sealing away a part of herself that would soon be set free. In the afternoon, Ava called. Mara's heart leapt the moment she heard her voice, that familiar softness carrying a thread of excitement. The exhibition is tonight at 5, Ava said, her tone almost shy beneath the surface. I'd really like you to be there. There's something I want you to see. Mara swallowed hard, her pulse thrumming. I'll come, she whispered, and even though her voice shook, there was conviction in it. After they hung up, she stood in front of the mirror, studying herself as though she were a stranger. She chose her clothes carefully, pulling out a deep blue dress she had never worn outside her apartment. She smoothed the fabric down her sides, her fingers trembling, then braided her hair loosely, letting strands fall free around her face. She whispered to her reflection, "You are enough. You are worthy of love. You will not hide tonight." When evening arrived, Mara stepped into the exhibition space with her heart pounding against her ribs. The gallery was alive with color and sound, soft music hummed in the background, voices rose and fell in waves, and the warm glow of spotlights lit the canvases along the walls. She moved through the crowd slowly, her eyes searching, until she found her. Ava stood near the center, dressed simply in black, her hair pinned back to reveal the delicate lines of her face. She looked radiant, as though she belonged entirely to the light. When she saw Mara, her expression softened, her lips curving into that familiar half-smile that always made Mara's breath catch. She walked toward her, brushing her fingers briefly against Mara's arm as she whispered, "I'm glad you came." Mara's gaze drifted toward the paintings on display, and her breath faltered. There, in the center of the room, was the piece she had seen before, the two figures, their hands suspended in longing. But beside it hung something new, something that made Mara's knees weaken. It was a portrait, soft and unpolished, but unmistakably her. The tilt of her chin, the curve of her mouth, the vulnerability in her eyes, it was all there, painted with a tenderness that left no doubt about the artist's intent. Mara stood frozen, her heart swelling with awe and fear all at once. She turned to Ava, who was watching her closely, her expression unreadable yet filled with intensity. As the crowd gathered, Ava stepped forward to speak. Her voice carried easily, calm but steady. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke briefly about her journey as an artist, about how her work had always been an attempt to capture what words could not. Then her tone shifted, quiet but firm, her eyes locking on to Mara's. "But lately," she said, "my paintings have come from a place much closer to my heart. They're about connection. About being seen when you think you're invisible. About courage." The room hushed as her words filled the air, but Mara heard nothing beyond the pounding of her own pulse. Ava's gaze did not waver. She spoke as though the two of them were alone, as though the rest of the world had faded away. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, the weight of years of silence pressing against her chest. She touched the countdown on her wrist without thinking, her fingers brushing the glow. 5 minutes left. 5 minutes until the promise she had made to herself would either be fulfilled or broken. Her body trembled with the gravity of it, her heart caught between terror and hope. The air around her seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, with the certainty that something was about to change forever. As the last moments of the countdown slipped away, Mara closed her eyes briefly, whispering to herself the words that had haunted her from the very beginning. "It's now or never," and when she opened them, Ava was already walking toward her.
Mara stood rooted to the floor as Ava moved toward her, the soft hum of voices and the shuffle of footsteps in the gallery fading until the world seemed to hold only the two of them. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, each heartbeat crashing in her ears like a drum. She could feel the glow on her wrist intensify, the final seconds slipping away in silence. Ava stopped just inches from her, close enough that Mara could see the faint specks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of paint and jasmine that always clung to her skin. For a moment, neither spoke, but the air between them was alive, heavy with all the things they had both left unsaid for too long. Mara's lips parted, but the words refused to come. Her throat tightened, fear clawing up her chest, threatening to smother the courage she had been fighting to gather. Then Ava's gaze shifted downward, and she noticed the faint glow pulsing on Mara's wrist. Her brows drew together, curiosity flickering across her face, and before Mara could pull her arm away, Ava gently took her hand, lifting it slightly. Her fingers were warm, steady, grounding Mara as her thumb brushed the small device that had governed every waking thought for days. Ava tilted her head, her voice so soft it trembled. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes lifting back to Mara's with a searching intensity. Mara swallowed hard, her throat dry, and for a moment she considered lying, pushing it off as some ordinary gadget. But the weight of the countdown pressed against her skin, demanding truth. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "It's my reminder." My promise to myself that I would finally tell you what I've been too afraid to say. Ava's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't let go. Instead, her grip tightened just a little, as though urging Mara forward. The gallery around them felt distant now, a blur of bodies and sound that barely reached them. Mara's heart slammed against her ribs as the final seconds bled away, and then, as though she had been holding her breath for years, the words tumbled out. "I'm in love with you," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of it. Tears welled in her eyes, her body trembling, but she forced herself to continue. "From the first moment I saw you, I've carried it with me. Every laugh, every moment, every piece of silence we've shared, it's been everything to me. I've been terrified of losing you, terrified of ruining what we already have. But I can't stay quiet anymore. Not now. Not when this is the only truth I've ever been sure of." The glow on her wrist faded into nothing, the countdown complete. Mara felt both emptied and reborn, as though all the fear she had carried for years had been stripped from her in that single confession. Silence stretched between them, long and fragile, and Mara's heart dropped into her stomach. Ava's eyes shimmered with something unreadable, her lips parted but no words came immediately. Panic clawed at Mara's chest, the familiar terror of rejection threatening to swallow her whole. She pulled her hand back, taking a shaky step away, whispering, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have," but before she could finish, Ava reached forward and caught her hand again, her touch firm, anchoring her in place. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she shook her head. "Don't apologize," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. She took a slow breath, her thumb brushing over Mara's trembling fingers. "I've been afraid too. Afraid of what it would mean if I said it out loud, afraid you didn't feel the same. So I painted instead. I tried to let the color speak for me, because I didn't know if I was brave enough to speak for myself." Mara blinked, her breath catching. "You mean," her voice faltered, too fragile to finish the sentence. Ava's lips curved into the faintest smile, tender and raw. "I love you too, Mara. I've loved you for so long, I don't even remember when it started. But I didn't want to risk losing you either. I thought if I just kept it inside, if I just stayed close, it would be enough. But it never was. It never will be." Tears spilled freely down Mara's cheeks, but this time they weren't born of fear. Relief washed over her in waves so powerful she could barely stand. She laughed through the tears, a sound broken and full of wonder. Ava stepped closer, lifting her hand to gently wipe the tears from Mara's face. Her touch lingered, soft and reverent, before her hand slipped to rest against Mara's cheek. Mara leaned into it instinctively, closing her eyes, letting the warmth seep into the cracks that years of silence had left behind. Around them, the murmur of the gallery continued, but neither of them noticed. They stood suspended in their own small universe, a place carved out of honesty and trembling hope. Mara opened her eyes, her lips parting with the faintest of questions that hung in the air between them. Ava answered without hesitation, closing the space as her forehead touched Mara's, their breaths mingling in the fragile stillness. "It's always been you," Ava whispered. In that moment, the world seemed to shift, the weight of years of fear dissolving into something softer, something freer. Mara let out a shaky breath, pressing her hand over Ava's where it rested against her face. For the first time, she felt what it was like to live without hiding, without silence gnawing at her heart. For the first time, she felt whole. Mara didn't know how long they stayed like that, her forehead pressed against Ava's, their hands clasped together as though letting go would send them both tumbling into pieces again. Time lost its meaning. The gallery, the voices, the music, all of it blurred into a background hum that couldn't touch them. For once, silence didn't terrify Mara. It wrapped around her like a soft blanket, steady and safe, because it was shared. When Ava finally pulled back enough to look at her, her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her smile was the kind that lit everything around her. Mara felt her own lips curve in response, a smile she hadn't felt in years, one unshaken by fear or doubt. They left the gallery together after the crowd began to thin, the cool night air rushing over them as the door closed behind. Mara inhaled deeply, her lungs filling with the crisp scent of autumn leaves and faint city smoke. It felt like her first real breath in years. Ava walked close beside her, their hands brushing until Ava laced their fingers without hesitation. Mara's chest tightened at the simplicity of it, the way something she had dreamed of for so long had suddenly become real, solid, undeniable. They walked in comfortable quiet, the street lamps casting soft pools of light along the sidewalk, their shadows stretching and folding into one another like they were meant to belong. When they reached the park nearby, Ava tugged Mara gently toward a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. They sat, still hand in hand, as the branches whispered overhead. Mara's heart was calmer now, though every beat carried a new tenderness. She turned to Ava, studying her profile in the dim light, and whispered, "I almost lost this. I almost let fear take it away." Ava turned, her thumb brushing over Mara's knuckles. "So did I. But we didn't. We're here now. That's what matters." Her voice was steady, but Mara could hear the emotion behind it, the years of unspoken longing now finding release. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, recalling every night she had lain awake imagining this, every page of her journal filled with words she never thought Ava would hear. To be sitting here now, her hand held tightly, was almost too much to believe. She opened her eyes again and said softly, "I thought love wasn't meant for me. That maybe I was cursed to always be the one watching from the edges. But with you, you make me feel like I belong." Ava leaned closer, her voice trembling just slightly as she replied, "You've always belonged, Mara. With me. Even when we were both too scared to admit it." The confession hung between them, fragile and yet unbreakable, and Mara felt a surge of courage she had never known before. She shifted closer, their knees brushing, her free hand lifting to rest against Ava's cheek. Ava's breath caught, and for a moment, time froze again. Then, with all the hesitation finally burned away, Mara leaned in. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative, but the connection deepened quickly, as though years of silence had been waiting to be undone by this single act. The kiss was not perfect, it trembled with uncertainty and carried the sharp edges of all they had endured, but it was real, raw, and more beautiful than anything Mara had ever imagined. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads touched again, both of them laughing softly through tears. Ava whispered, "Now or never, right?" And Mara laughed harder, the sound breaking free like light through a storm. She nodded, her voice steady this time. "Now. Always now." They stayed in the park until the stars pricked the sky and the city quieted around them, speaking in fragments, in promises, in the language of two people finally unafraid to be seen. As the night grew colder, Ava rested her head on Mara's shoulder, and Mara wrapped her arm around her, holding her close as if to protect her from the chill, but really to assure herself that this was real. The countdown was gone now, faded from her wrist, but its meaning lingered. It had brought her here, forced her to stop running, to stop letting fear dictate the shape of her life. She thought of all the times she had been silent before, all the regrets that had followed her like shadows. They didn't matter anymore. Not now. Mara tilted her head to kiss the top of Ava's hair, whispering into the stillness, "I won't hide anymore. Not from you, not from myself." Ava lifted her face, her smile soft but sure. "Good. Because I'm not letting you go." Their eyes held one another's for a long moment, and in that gaze, Mara saw not only love but also a future, one filled with warmth, with laughter, with the courage to face whatever came next. When they finally rose to leave, walking home hand in hand, Mara glanced down at her bare wrist. For the first time, she didn't need numbers counting her down to remind her of what mattered. She had already chosen. She had already spoken. And with Ava beside her, she knew she would never go back to silence again.